Okay, so I've started it, and now I'm going to admit all. There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We are going to get started shortly, but I'm just going to let a few minutes for everyone to join. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your patience. I think we're going to get started here. First of all, happy World Biodiversity Day. I'm very happy that we could get everyone together and celebrate biodiversity through this webinar. We're going to begin so that other people can just come in and join as they go. So let's get going. So today's webinar is going to look at the business case for biodiversity credits. This is the third webinar of our three-part series. All of the webinars will be recorded and accessible through our website. So I invite you to take a look after if you've missed the 1 and 2. So before we jump in, I just wanted to go through our webinar agenda. So we're going to start with an opening. Then we'll have Juana Ramirez speak about the roadmap for biodiversity finance. She's from the GLF. Then we'll have Humberto Rocha speak about the sort of overview of the biodiversity credit market. Humberto is an editor at Opus. And then we'll end with Ash Knopf from Wilderlands, who will provide some understanding and sort of case studies of his experience at Wilderlands selling biodiversity credits in the Australian market. And then we'll end with a Q&A. So I just want to make sure everyone's getting accepted into the meeting. Okay, there we go. Humberto, is it possible for you to accept people into the meeting as I'm presenting?
Yes, I can check. I haven't seen the action yet, but if I do, I will accept them.
Okay, thank you so much. Mm-hmm. So here we go. Thank you, everyone. So I'd like to start with the very impactful fact that puts a lot of perspective to the conversation we're going to have today on biodiversity credits. And that is, humans have transformed 75% of Earth's land. So let's just sink that in, because in other words, that means that we have lost 75% of Earth's habitat. So we're not just talking about a nature crisis here. We're talking about a crisis for business, society, and the future of our planet. Because there's a big link between humans and nature. Because more than 50% of the world's GDP is actually reliant on nature. So business and nature have a link. So let's explore that link. So we have what's called natural capital stocks, and this is biodiversity, water, nutrient cycles. And these natural capital stocks create flows, which are ecosystem services, such as clean water, climate regulation, food production. And these ecosystem flows are basically the invisible foundation of our society, of business, our economies. So here's a clear link how business and biodiversity are tied together. And therefore, you can say that biodiversity loss is therefore bad for business, because biodiversity loss undermines the natural systems that businesses depend on. Biodiversity loss can lead to operational risks, supply chain disruptions, reputational damages. So biodiversity loss is bad for business. There's a clear link in that. So what is the global response to this problem, to this crisis that we're facing? Well, the World Economic Forum listed this as the third highest risk that's, humanity is facing. So it's a big deal, and it's something that businesses need to take seriously. So again, what is the response to business? What is the global response to this biodiversity crisis? Target 15 of the Global Biodiversity Framework encourages businesses to regularly monitor, assess, and transparently disclose their risks, their nature dependencies, and their nature impacts, their impacts on biodiversity. So therefore, frameworks have emerged to help businesses integrate biodiversity. And these frameworks are disclosure frameworks like the TNFD. And the TNFD uses what's called the LEAP model, which is locate, evaluate, assess, and respond. So remember that fourth one, which is respond. Then you have your target setting frameworks. So that's like the SBTN as an example. And they use the mitigation hierarchy, which is avoid first, nature impacts, reduce your nature impacts, restore, and regenerate. So therefore, biodiversity credits are part of this mitigation hierarchy and can be used as a tool that businesses can use to integrate into these frameworks and create, let's call it, impacts, and use biodiversity credits to, first of all, showcase tangible mitigation and stewardship efforts. So for the TNFD, biodiversity credits can really show how that company is improving biodiversity. And then for the SBTi, that biodiversity credits can be used to show how they're achieving targets, particularly in relation to ecosystem restoration and species protection. So like I said, biodiversity credits are not a reporting tool, but they are an implementation tool. And that's really important that we make this distinction. So let's sort of take a broad look at this biodiversity credit market that is developing. And what is the role of the biodiversity credit market? Because it's not a substitute for impact reduction, right? We have the mitigation hierarchy, and biodiversity credits should be at the bottom, should be about responding, restoring, regenerating, should be a tool for action. So it should be used as this sort of complementary mechanism to deliver nature positive outcomes. And obviously we need to have integrity, transparency, and alignment to these science-based targets. And biodiversity is not fungible, meaning that it's a market that's very similar to the automobile market, where you have different models, attributes, values. And I believe that that's a good thing, because biodiversity is so diverse. An ecosystem in Brazil is going to be different than an ecosystem in the Congo, which is different than an ecosystem in Australia. So we need to have this flexibility, and we need to have a multitude of methodologies. And yes, there is more than 50 methodologies, because each address a different aspect of biodiversity, its species, habitats, ecosystem functions. Credits have different prices, claims, outcomes, and these are all tailored to buyer needs. So I think it's a good thing that there's all of these methodologies existing. However, we do need to agree on some high-level principles to guide the market, which is integrity, quality, and inclusion. And these principles, I believe, can act as a global safeguard for credibility. They can create trust between buyers and sellers and guide us in creating this really ethical biodiversity market. But ultimately, buyers are looking for transparency, and they're also looking for, the right fit. So meaning we need to understand, like, do I want to buy a smart car, a Toyota, a Land Rover? What kind of biodiversity credit fits my needs? And therefore, it's important that we have this comparability, that we can compare, and that we have this common language in order to compare different methodologies and different credits. And that will build confidence, durability, and will build this robust market that we're all wanting. So the BCA, Biodiversity Credit Alliance, and Josh Brand was actually in our last webinar, he talked about the comparability framework, which are 24 key data points or attributes that they defined as important to help buyers understand and compare biodiversity credits based on the buyer's goals, values, and their impact priorities. So I think we're heading in the right direction with this market. But a market needs buyers, and buyers need incentives. So let's take a look at what the incentives are for corporates to buy biodiversity credits. I think we can all agree that the best incentive would be a regulatory incentive, right? A top-down, you must do this. However, we don't have a global mandate yet, but we do have really exciting examples like the European Nature Restoration Law, and in Colombia, they have a biodiversity offsets regulation, but most markets are still voluntary. So in this notion of a voluntary biodiversity credit market, what would then drive corporate action? And I've listed a few examples that could drive corporate action, which would be brand reputation, consumer expectations. Buyers are increasingly demanded for nature positive brands. So you have this brand trust, brand loyalty. I know this product is leading to positive impacts on nature. Brands can, leverage this impact and turn it into impact storytelling and narratives. So, this product restores jaguar habitat, or campaigns that are shared market value. We also have then pressure from investors and pressures from, ESG commitments. So investors could say that, no, you need to align with the TNFD, the SBTi, you need to start disclosing your risks so we understand the company's risk profile. And then obviously the last but not least, the first mover advantage. So leading before regulations catch up, shaping the narrative, setting the standards, and really differentiating the brand. So I believe, today we're more over here, but hopefully with ambitious regulations and ambitious governments, we can get to over here, which would be a global mandate. But I think we can all, agree on the incentives are clear. There is no business on a dead planet, right? But there is an enormous opportunity for business on a thriving planet. And I believe that biodiversity credits are a tool to help us get there, and a tool to help turn ambition into action, risk into restoration. So I'd like to just end with, nature positive isn't a charity. Nature positive is smart business. So that's how we should be positioning these credits to business, and how we should be engaging them to start purchasing these credits and build a very robust market. So I'm going to stop there. I'm now going to hand it over to Juana Ramirez. She will be speaking to us about the roadmap for biodiversity finance. She is from the GLF, the Global Landscapes Forum. So please, Juana, if you could share your screen.
Hello, everybody. I'm trying to share my screen. Give me a second. Is it working?
We can see your screen. However, we're not seeing the presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think yeah, now we are. If you
Give me a
just put it
second.
full screen, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, so my name is Juana Ramirez. I'm the Sustainable Finance Coordinator for the Global Landscapes Forum, which is a global community of actors working for a sustainable world. We are a C4E craft organization that was created in 2013. And we are supported by the leading organizations in development and environmental issues that work with a global outreach. So we are a global network working to share messages of innovative finance and new ways of financing the global biodiversity framework, the Climate Change Paris Agreement, and the SDGs. Since 2015, we have been organizing events as the Investment Case Symposium. And last year, during COP16, we had an important event where we discussed how to define a roadmap to finance biodiversity. And we are going to present the outcomes of these discussions and also invite everybody to join the discussions and the building of these specific instruments that we are talking about today in our next investment case symposium that's going to take place in Brazil during COP30. So just to remind what happened during that event, the 7th GLF Biodiversity Investment Case Symposium. Thanks to the support of the Luxembourg government, we gathered a global community to share their inputs on what is the best way and the best solutions to facilitate innovative finance. And the roadmap that I invite you all to consult in this QR code was discussed with civil society, with investors, with social organizations active in Colombia, but worldwide. And there were 6 building blocks that we identified as key to put in place in terms to reward the values of nature. These key principles, we are going to see them more in depth through the discussions. But the point here is to also shed light of some of the controversies or the discussions that took place during this event in terms of what are the incentives and the realities that the people in the ground are looking for in order to mobilize capital to their needs, to serve their needs. And so during this event, we had different views on how to see and reward nature. Even if we were talking about the incentives that need to be put in place, it was important also to see what are what the beneficiaries or the stewards of nature asking for in the ground in terms of the new mechanisms that need to be developed. And so in this sense, we as GLF are very much interested in taking into account the opinions of indigenous communities and local communities. And so we understood that, for example, the role of finance during the conference was something that was still to be defined and that was still to be better identified as an integration with what's happening in the current discussions. And these discussions, we if I bring it to what's happening in the current regulatory frameworks in Europe, in terms of there is a debate between an approach of impact finance and transition finance, and independently of the fact that these standards, new standards that have been put in place as TNFD or GRI are not necessarily yet are voluntary and not necessarily yet approved. We do consider there are enablers for these business case of biodiversity credits, and these discussions need still to be put in place and encouraged in order for these frameworks to evolve, incorporating the views of people in the ground. And this is why we are here for, and why would like to put our platform at the service of these kind of discussions. So I'm not going to go in depth on the standards of TNFD and GRI, but this is just to say that many of the controversies come from the fact that these standards are still being defined, and they need to be more inclusive and take into account not only the necessities of the enterprises and corporates themselves, but also how to factor for real impact, where we really see that biodiversity credits are an important tool. And so, as Hannah was mentioning, regulation is an enabler, and in Europe, there has been recent highlights or important shifts in terms of, for example, the adoption of the Convention of Protection for Environmental through Climate Law, which clearly sends a signal for the importance of putting the protection of life first. And these criminal law frameworks, together with sustainable finance frameworks on the building, are complementary, and they are making the case for the actual current model of the economy to shift to and to create more innovative approaches, which we believe are the ones that we are discussing today. I wanted to go more in depth into the Colombian case, as Hannah was mentioning, because of this regulatory environment. There has been the possibility for Terrazos, one of the pioneering organizations and the leaders of biodiversity credits in the nascent market. It was enabled because of a law in Colombia that created the possibility of putting in place these mechanisms, habitat banks in the territory, and also provided a window for local communities to beneficiate from these instruments and the work that they and the lives that they can finance by these instruments. And so it is interesting to see that example, as well as Savimbo, which is an indigenous-led company working also in the Colombian Amazon, but with a global reach of indigenous communities worldwide. And what's interesting here in terms of the regulatory framework as an incentive is that in Colombia as well, the Constitution of 1991 gave indigenous people rights to autodetermine themselves and also have their lands and territories protected. And so because of these kind of initiatives can give people or indigenous peoples the means and the mechanisms to express themselves and come up with initiatives like this one, that is the partnership with between different or type of organizations that has an app that allows individuals like you and me to buy biodiversity credits online, and these credits arrive, the capital and or the resources go directly to the persons in the ground that are protecting nature and monitoring its conservation. So this is just to give two examples of how a regulatory environment can enable innovation and can help new solutions come to life. And yes, as a conclusion is a little bit what Hannah already said, but from the GLF point of view, what we would like to stress is that there is indeed a need of a paradigm shift, like we need new businesses and new ways of doing finance, and finance needs to be at the service of life and not the other way around. And this regulatory perspective that recognizes the rights of nature as a foundational framework is a good entry point, not only to include the voices of local communities in the discussions of how these new instruments need to be built, but also to enable a positive dialogue between the North and the South, and also to come up with new incentives and new initiatives if these kind of frameworks are adopted globally. So thank you very much. We are looking forward to have more of all of you as innovators and people interested in this kind of topics joining us in our events, and especially in the next investment case symposium that will take place in COP13 in the framework of our partnership with Luxembourg and the GLF Luxembourg for that's financing solutions to reward nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juana. Lovely presentation. And I think you hit it home at the end there, talking about, you know, nature rights, and also the mechanisms that we're building need to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge, traditional wisdom from the indigenous groups. So that's a really key point. And that's why we love so much solutions that are co-created from the bottom up rather than top down. So thank you for bringing that. So next up, we have Humberto from Opus. He is going to provide a bit of an overview of the biodiversity credit market and how it's developing, and provide us some interesting information. So over to you, Humberto.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Very, very exciting to be here. And yeah, especially on the day for International Biodiversity. So as Hannah was saying, I am an editor at Opus, where we been covering the voluntary biodiversity market for the past year. This week is our anniversary issue, so it's we're really excited to get this out there. But yeah, talking about what Hannah and Juana have been talking about in terms of regulation, demand, purchases. I'd like to kind of just give a view of what we've seen over the past year.
One sec.
Yes.
Juana, can you just stop sharing your screen? We can still see your screen. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Go ahead, Humberto. Sorry for interrupting.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's been really exciting to cover this market. It's really interesting to see a market start out, grow, see the structure being built. So kind of just, I think I have just 3 points I'd like to talk about, which are purchases and then regulation, and obviously into demand, and how demand is the big question here and how that will be grown. But just from the purchases we've seen, so when we started covering this a year ago, we only had a couple of developers on our weekly report. We have now grown that to include a total of 12 developers, and it's a growing list, but 39 projects right now that are issuing credits or are in the stage very close to issuing these types of credits, whether it's on the blockchain or on their own website, or whether you have to reach out to the developers themselves. And in addition to that, we have 5 developers that are in early stage developments, which means they're not issuing credits yet. They may or may not, but are actively considering it. And this helps potential investors or clients reach out to these developers and say, we're interested in investing, or how can we get into this? Again, this is, I think a lot of people know, but this is a market that a lot of corporates are still trying to understand, trying to assess and see how it affects not only their bottom line, but again, their supply chain and supply chain risks. But in purchases, I mean, in the past couple of months, we've seen a lot of big movements. In one of the bigger ones that we covered was Mirova purchasing credits from Replanet. It was part of Mirova's $350 million investment across 3 different areas, but one of those was Replanet's projects in Costa Rica. And that was we actually covered this before the announcement was made, but it's part of the French Sustainable Investment Fund signing an agreement on behalf of Orange Nature Fund and the Climate Fund for Nature on a project that is supposed to generate 2 million carbon credits and 1.3 million biodiversity credits over a 40-year lifetime. And this project incentivizes cattle farmers to reforest 30% of the lands along certain corridors to protect water supplies. So something we've seen lately is that there is a big interest in biodiversity credits, but bundled or stacked with carbon credits. It seems to be something many companies at this point understand what carbon credits are and are now gauging their interest in biodiversity credits. So I think the familiarity of carbon credits and biodiversity credits together is something that helps companies be interested in this and ask a bit more questions about what biodiversity credits are or biodiversity co-benefits are. So that's one of the biggest purchases we have recorded in recent weeks and in the past year. Another really interesting purchase was and another lesson to learn is from Carbo Biodiversity. They've really honed in on production forest landscapes. They're based in Sweden. Sweden being a relatively small country compared to, say, the likes of Latin American countries or where most projects can be, has really focused in on production forest landscapes. And this has worked out to their advantage. I think by focusing in on this particular type of landscape, they've developed a methodology that applies to it. In Sweden, a lot of people depend on timber for production, for business. And so by incentivizing certain companies to not burn down or not to take down these types of forests and instead earn money by preserving them, Carbo Biodiversity has developed a very interesting methodology. And we've seen that this methodology has worked now in the US last week. Carbo Biodiversity confirmed that there was an offtake agreement, the first of its type in the US, of a voluntary biodiversity credits. And this is again related to a production forest landscape in Maryville, Louisiana. This will be a 5-year, I believe a 25-year agreement, but it's very exciting to see that we've started to notice that, as Hannah was saying, it's great that there's a number of different methodologies because biodiversity is simply, in my opinion, not fungible. But if you can focus in or on a certain landscape and take that somewhere else that aligns or can work with that methodology, we see that there has been a successful sale so far. So very exciting development. As Juana mentioned, Terrazos, we've seen Terrazos enabled by the legislation in Colombia in recent years, has successfully sold, and they're one of, along with Wilderlands and Tasman Environmental Markets, and I believe Ash will talk with us after, but Wilderlands and Terrazos have successfully, they sell their biodiversity credit units on a weekly, monthly basis, and it's really exciting to see. And again, these are markets where Colombia has the offsetting compliance regulation, Australia has that as well, but it also has a nature repair market in the works. So we're seeing Australia develop this voluntary market to enable certain people interested in this market to preserve their landscapes opposed to working or exploiting them for biodiversity credits. Another developer in France is Le Printemps de Terre. They have sold a number, I believe, 200,000 credits from two projects entirely, which is before Mirova, before we reported on Mirova, this was the first example of two projects selling all of the credits entirely. And I believe that those were projects located in Western France. And again, this might be smaller in scale, but another important lesson learned in covering the market has been the local angle. France, from our coverage, has a lot of asset management funds, banks, and institutions that are very interested in nature positive commitments and follow up with them through the creation of asset management funds or biodiversity specific funds. And I think we saw that resulting in the purchase of these two projects in their entirety, which we reported earlier this year. And I believe we're also seeing the creation of private debt funds and investment funds specifically dedicated to biodiversity. We covered Siena Investment Managers, who are also investing in Region Ag and other projects. And I believe they're looking into biodiversity credits, but may not invest in them now. But I think the lessons learned in terms of purchases in the past year has been that while biodiversity may not be fungible, it is possible to focus on a specific landscape and transplant that to another country and see if that works. We've seen a successful purchase of that. We have noticed that the local interest and the local angle is very, very important in terms of biodiversity. Having covered this market, I am aware of UK developers who have successfully have obtained the interest of local banks in nature recovery, nature restoration. And again, I think people do care about nature. People care about preserving the nature around them. And I think this card plays really strongly in the local angle. But again, we've seen that there is also international interest, and that's on the Mirova case, Mirova purchasing these credits from a project in Costa Rica. So there also is a big international interest in buying credits from another area. So that is kind of the purchases that we tracked. But again, how does this relate to regulation? Well, in the UK, we have been covering, the UK has launched a consultation to encourage the offtake of nature markets, but also implemented regulations such as the sustainable reporting standards, which are currently stalled at the moment. We were supposed to see draft legislation at the end of quarter of Q1. We haven't seen that yet, but we're seeing the UK establish this and encouraging its rollout. The UK also has biodiversity net gain, which requires developers to at least improve biodiversity, whether it's on-site, off-site, or buying credits by 10%. And I think this regulation and we've seen this in the Colombia case as well, this regulation has helped developer Earthly. Earthly has basically their methodology is essentially a copy-paste of BNG, but it is used within the UK voluntary market, and that has resulted in sales as well to, I believe, King Digital Entertainment, the maker of Candy Crush. But we've seen, again, that regulation does play an important factor in developing, implementing, and rolling out voluntary markets, as is in Colombia, and we've seen that in the UK as well. The EU, as Juana well mentioned, there is a larger interest in biodiversity and nature markets. We've seen the EU Commissioner, President von der Leyen, mention this in her speech. She's talking about nature credits and nature markets. In late April, we covered the EU Commission. The Commissioner for Environment and Water Resilience held a roundtable discussion with stakeholders like Deutsche Bank, NASDAQ, WWF, Rabobank, the Nature Conservancy, and other developers to see how to spur this nature credit market, again, to restore nature, but also preserve it instead of exploiting it, as land use and land management becomes a more increasingly important issue in Europe. And we're also starting to cover more areas as well. But definitely we see how the impact of regulation can help spur these markets. And also something that we're looking into as well is tax incentives. And I bring this up because as we start covering the creation of standards, say from like the International Financial Reporting Standards, they're looking at creating biodiversity, ecosystem, and ecosystem services standards, also known as BEES, but also how this could play a role in companies disclosing their investments in nature positive commitments, in biodiversity credits, and eventually how that could play into not only their branding, their commitment, but as well as their part of the disclosure requirements if governments roll out these types of disclosure requirements. And kind of just to wrap up, again, the question has been demand. Where is demand? How do you grow demand? I mean, demand is the biggest question so far, and something that we've bumped into every single week. But I think the examples that we put up in the past couple of minutes, we see the importance of compliance markets and how that plays into the development of voluntary markets as well, voluntary methodologies that companies are used to already. We see the growing number of adopters of TNFD frameworks. I believe they are over 500 last I checked, and they're doing a push ahead of COP30 in Brazil. But I think demand, and from the purchases of credits, again, it's a local angle is very important. The international angle is possible, maybe a bit more difficult, but there's a lot of finance going to the international angle. And lastly, again, if you are able to have a methodology that works in one place and that can work in another place, depending on the land manager there, that is something that we've seen can work. But however, we do ask the question if governments will compel companies, will require companies to either disclose their nature contributions or their investments in nature. We've been covering that certain governments are looking at double materiality, how climate affects them, but also how their operations affect climate, and seeing if that is a growing tendency. And yes, but we will be having more interesting interviews with high-ranking officials in the coming weeks. And definitely check out our issue today, which where we ask a British MP if companies would be ever required to contribute 0.01% of their revenues toward nature restoration. But in terms of purchases, regulation, and demand, that's kind of a year in covering this market is what we've noticed. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Humberto. You bring such a great panorama of the market, and it's amazing to hear all of the different credit sales that are existing and that are happening. So it really is a market that's shaping up. And thank you so much for everything. So now we're going to switch it over to Wilderlens. Wilderlens is an Australian-based project developer as well as a methodology developer. So they have a proprietary methodology. It's based on ecological conservation covenants, so protecting conservation habitat for the long term, as well as this notion of stewardship. And Ash will be joining us. However, since it's 2 or 3 a.m. in Australia, he's not going to be joining us live. So we did a pre-recording, and I will be sharing this pre-recording now. So give me a second here. Okay, share. Here we go.
Well, thank you for having me, Hannah, and hello all. So Wilderlens was established in 2021, co-founded by my business partner, a 6th-generation farmer who grew up on the land and frankly just wanted to value nature appropriately. And prior to founding Wilderlens, he founded a conservation organisation called Cassinia Environmental, which has done some incredible work over the last 20 plus years here in Australia. Over 100 landscape scale projects, everything from biodiversity protection through to regeneration and carbon projects, as well as regenerative agriculture and a range of other things. And when I met him he was really at a point in time where he was getting very excited about the potential of the future of biodiversity credits more broadly. Having played in what's known as biodiversity offsets, he really saw an opportunity in the voluntary biodiversity credit space. And frankly, I didn't come with any experience in that world, in conservation or environmental markets, but I was mad enough to kind of work with him and do some R&D, and kind of, I guess 4 years later, what we find ourselves is co-leading a team of subject matter experts who are, I guess, waking up every day, trying to protect more nature and trying to find buyers to support the work that we do.
Amazing. And so Wilderlands started your own protocol in Australia that helps fund the protection of biodiversity in private lands. And then you connect with buyers.
That's right. I should have been a bit more specific. So in short, our methodology, which is predicated on a couple of core principles, which align very well with Australian legislation and infrastructure. So we're very fortunate in Australia that we've got things called conservation covenants, similar to what easements say in North America, whereby placed on private land of high ecological value, you can place a conservation covenant, which means that land now needs to be protected for nature forever. And you are regulated by the government to ensure that you're doing that. And so all of our projects have that promise. They are permanently protected. But of course, you can't just put a fence around it and just leave it alone. It requires regular work to ensure pest and weed management is done appropriately and threatened species management is done appropriately. And that comes at a cost. And so what we help fund is 20 years of ongoing and active management. Permanent protection is done through the existing covenant, 20 years of active management. And so when we sell a credit, the vast majority of those funds go to that project holder or land holder to support that activity.
Amazing. And what led you guys to look at biodiversity credits as a revenue stream? Is there a reason for corporates to purchase those credits in Australia? Or how do you create that sort of business case and those sales channels? Is there a more developed market in Australia for biodiversity credits, or you guys are at the forefront in building it?
I don't think there's necessarily more progress here than any other country, other than say those frameworks and that around covenants. And there was already a biodiversity offset scheme. I think actually globally, we often look at, say, Colombia as a compare in terms of the legislation and the confidence and momentum in the market that existed in biodiversity offsets. But the reality is we launched prior to the global biodiversity framework's 30 by 30 commitments, with a belief that the world would take impacts on nature as seriously as they do their carbon footprint. But the reality is, and I often joke, but it's not a joke, that we created a product that nobody wanted in a market that didn't exist. We were very early, and the idea and the thinking was, okay, let's get out ahead of our expectation that both individuals, corporates, and government are going to want to support this. Let's come up with a program or a mechanism that is tied to existing legislation and infrastructure, that then brings confidence to a customer or a buyer who's going to sponsor and support that activity on the ground. And we've done that, but then we couldn't sit and wait for the market to mature. And that's where I guess we've found ourselves over the last 3 odd years since we launched our platform and our projects, waking up every day and going, right, who's going to help? Who's going to support? Who's going to sponsor this activity?
So, and it seems like you guys have had luck, because in the Opus report, I constantly see sales. So if you could talk a bit about the target corporates and sort of the sales process that you guys, and the angles, that would be amazing.
Yeah, certainly. And it's certainly evolved over that 3 years. So early doors, we really focused on individuals. We sell credits down to 1 square meter, and which means that the price point is really attainable. Our projects vary between, say, at a retail level, $3 to $10 per square meter. And so any individual can come along and purchase, say, 10 square meters to support activity on a given project. Now, that's all well and good, but we're not going to have much impact at 10 square meters at a time. And so we've always known that big corporates engaging at large scale is where we need to trend and head. But of course, you've got to prove yourself. You've got to build traction. You've got to start somewhere. And so early doors, we focused on individuals, and we engaged with individuals at that small level, as well as philanthropists who started to believe in what we're doing, who could see the impact, who would receive regular updates, if not come and visit the projects. But increasingly, our conversations started to engage with businesses, and that might be, say, small to medium enterprises. And it might be because they saw it as a nice thing to do, or it might be because they actually thought that actually this could be a differentiator in the market to engage customers. Say, for instance, we engaged with a beauty brand out of Adelaide, 2 hours north of our Coorong Lakes project, and we co-created with them a product, what was called the Wildflower Duo, which was a hand wash and lotion product that was sold to their customers, and for every product sold, 1 square meter was protected. And this product kind of flew off the shelves. It was their fastest selling product. It was great for obviously their brand and customers, and it was terrific for us. It raised our awareness and so on. And we've subsequently had other companies like that come to us and say, we'd like to do something similar.
Cool.
So engaging customers is one thing, but then there's been other opportunities whereby, and we're yet to see anywhere, I think, this regulation that is enforcing purchases. It's probably not too far away, but in Australia, that's yet to mature. But certainly there are schemes in certain sectors that encourage engagement with conservation organisations, such as in the built environment here. If you're going to build say a high rise in the middle of the city and you want it to be seen as a 5 or 6 star building, there are certain schemes whereby you get so many points towards an outcome if you were to protect the equivalent footprint of your building in an off-site conservation project. And because we sell down to the very square meter, we can give you exactly what you want at a price point that you can likely afford. So that's been quite interesting. And increasingly, and certainly since we met Hannah at COP16, we've seen a real pickup, a take-up from a corporate perspective in what we call the stapled market. And that is voluntary biodiversity credits being stapled to carbon credits, which enable, and I should have said up front that, you know, we are an Australian-based company with Australian-based projects that largely targets Australian-based corporate customers. We will eventually broaden our view and our vision, but one of the benefits of that is we kind of understand what's driving, you know, Australian company requirements and so on. And whilst there are heady net zero aspirations that these companies have, often buying Australian carbon credits is unattainable. They're just so expensive. Mm-hmm. And so they might choose to buy an overseas verified carbon credit, but they want to have an impact in Australia. And so by stapling one of our voluntary biodiversity credits on top, they can get the requirements from a carbon perspective, fulfill their regulations there, but they get a bonus of an Australian protection story. And that is, as mentioned, has probably, frankly, over the course of the last 7 or 8 months, doubled our sales since we launched just through that channel alone.
Wow, that's really, really valuable information. So thank you for sharing. And that's really interesting, that strategy. So I like that, to have the sort of Australian feel, but with the carbon reduction to meet their sort of net zero commitments. Really amazing. And obviously, where do you see the trend going for biodiversity credits? Do you believe, I mean, there's now, you know, over 50 different methodologies and protocols, and some people see that as a bad thing, but I don't see it so much as a bad thing. I believe that biodiversity needs a biodiverse set of metrics and flexibility in how each context-specific place wants to protect or restore or, you know, increase biodiversity. So I don't see it so much as a bad thing, but do you see there's going to be this one size fits all, or, you know, this one biodiversity, or where do you see the biodiversity market going? And yeah, just a bit about sort of future trends.
Well, Hannah, you've kind of been part of the market since its dawn as well, and you've also been part of the same conversations that we have, and that has been largely led by the question of, will there be one credit that kind of rules them all, or one methodology, you know, similar to the carbon ton? But I think it's been fairly obvious since the early days that we've come to appreciate that nature is too diverse, and that whilst we do need to have standardized approaches that are scientifically backed, that meet the highest level of ecological outcomes and that are verified through third parties and so on, that frankly right now innovation is not a bad thing. And the more diversity we have, it's largely reflective of the fact that the world is a big place and there are a lot of different requirements and a lot of different jurisdictions that have very different cultural and legal frameworks and so on. And so it's highly likely that what we're trying to do here in Australia, you can't just pick it up and just drop it somewhere else and expect it to work. And so I am no soothsayer nor fortune teller, but what I think will occur is that you will start to see organisations like Woodlands and ERA and the like aligning more and more with understanding where opportunities lie in their countries, and that's going to be driven by policy and legislation and so on. No doubt government have to play a part in this, but similarly it's going to come out of corporate requirements, and it's going to increasingly be led by corporate stakeholders such as their customers, their staff, their investors, etc., asking questions of their companies around risk and opportunity when it comes to nature engagement. And so my encouragement to our fellow voluntary biodiversity credit developers out there is don't get too stuck on what you think you've got today and what it needs to be. Be agile, continue to learn, continue to grow, and continue to engage, because the more that you're out there and testing your theories and your ideas and so on, the more feedback you're getting, the quicker we can adapt and evolve. I think going back to the genesis and the first question you asked, one of the reasons why we've perhaps seen more traction than perhaps others in the sector more broadly is that we haven't necessarily come at this like a typical conservation organisation might. And that is, we understand that we've got a world of pain, we've got a lot of work to do here, and we've got to move fast. We've actually seen ourselves as a small company and what we're trying to do, and we've looked at it through a startup lens, and that is, you've got to continue to put yourself out there, you've got to continue to be tested and expose yourself, and to be open, transparent and vulnerable to receive as much feedback as possible so that you can evolve as quickly as possible. And whilst we do need to stand on firm foundations, reputation and brand and science and all those things are critical, you've also got to be willing to move and go, because the world, its financial mechanisms, its geopolitics and all those kind of things are going to come hit you. And if you're standing too firmly on foundations that don't enable you to pivot, then you're going to find yourself in a world of pain.
Amazing. What amazing advice. And I really appreciate all the wealth of knowledge you have to share with us. And yeah, success to Wilderlands. And we hope to continue seeing you guys doing amazing big sales and corporate sales and leading the way. So thank you so much for all the work you guys have been doing.
Thanks, Anna. It's been a pleasure.
So that was Ash from Wilderlands. I think he has a lot of great information for us to learn from and to incorporate into our own selling of biodiversity credits. I wanted to go into a Q&A right now and sort of see what questions have arisen. I know we're supposed to be finishing in 1 minute, so I would like, for those who can stay a bit longer, we're just going to dive into some questions. The first question is directed at Humberto. Can you please share more about the Costa Rica credits that you mentioned? Do you have any more details about those cattle ranchers?
Yes, let me see. I did take notes on this one. Yes, so I think this project by Replanet will be on, let me see, Costa Rica. So at least the details that I know is that they Replanet has a very firm commitment that they want to have at least 60% of the profits go to the indigenous or local community in every other project. And I think they have, I know other project developers are doing the same, but they have really kind of made that a framework of their projects. So I believe that while the agreement has been signed, we're still covering kind of how that will play out in the coming weeks. But I'm happy, if you want, I'm happy to connect and get you more details on that as we continue to cover it. But it's definitely one of, again, the largest purchase we've seen in the past year. So it's very, very interesting.
Thank you. So Nicole Shaw asks about greenwashing concerns. So as we've seen in the last year, the carbon markets have been under fire. Organizations have even shied away, this whole green hushing. And given that biodiversity work is so much more complicated, do you see this as a major deterrent? What else is holding people back? Juana, Humberto, do you want to take a stab at that one? You're on mute.
I will say that what's holding people back also is lack of knowledge and lack of more platforms like this one where you can share actual examples of how it's done and maybe also actual feedback from the beneficiaries. I think this is something that maybe is lacking as well. To counteract this, the fact that there are greenwashing risks, there are actually issues, but this is a nascent initiative and market that still needs to build from a dialogue and construction. So I think this is a way of tackling the fact of lack of knowledge and lack of experiences and lack of visibility of what's working and what's not.
Yeah, and I can just answer it quickly. I mean, it's definitely a concern. We covered carbon credits before. It's definitely a concern in this nascent and growing market. If anything, from the project sites I've done, the good thing about biodiversity is that you have to show whether if it's an uplift based project, you have to show the uplift, and it's not something that you can do from one day to the next. There's definitely 5, 10, 20, 30-year commitments to these projects, so the work has to be shown. Whether what methods of technology you use, whether you use people in the field or eDNA or these other types of tools, that'll depend on a project per project basis. But it's definitely a fear. But I think the one thing, at least for projects that are uplift based, is that you have to show these results. You can't just recreate them. You can't just do it the night before an audit per se. So I think there is some tangible physicality that you have to show in these projects, just to show that you've done your work. And yeah, you can't do a 5-year work in one. It's something that yes, we'll have challenges and we'll be very much scrutinizing projects, but you have to show results. And I think that's something, having something tangible and physical to be shown, I think is very important in this market.
Yeah, and I'll just compliment, as a carbon project developer, ERA has, played in that market. And I think a lot of the criticism is around baseline setting, specifically around REDD+ projects, meaning that, what would be the deforestation in the business as usual scenario? And that, yes, can be, let's say, criticize how the baselines were set, but carbon markets are making a lot of advancements, and I think we're learning from our mistakes, creating jurisdictional baselines. Vera is actually, the standards are creating the baselines now. So I believe that we are entering into a different moment of the carbon market where there's going to be more integrity, and I think the biodiversity market, because it's coming up behind, can learn a lot from the carbon, what was done right, what was done wrong, and hopefully leapfrog some of the, let's say, failures, and try and just create a more robust market. But yeah, thank you for those questions. So we're about 5 minutes over. No other questions have come in. And I thank everyone for their time. Thank you, Humberto. Thank you, Juana, for you joining us. And thank you to all the listeners. This recording will be available on our website, and we'll also be sharing some of the presentations from the speakers. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. And happy International Day of Biodiversity. Take care.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Bye.